Hello everyone, Jazzy's back with the Kingdom Hearts Theory video. In this video I will be discussing Kingdom Hearts Dark Road. So far there has been 3 chapters and an introduction part released. Of course I'll cover all these parts and connect it back to my previous theory videos. Again, tying it into recent updates with Kingdom Hearts Union Cross and Melody of Memories, Kingdom Hearts 3, Kingdom Hearts 3 Remind, all the wonderful updates that have been going on with Kingdom Hearts as of recently. This will be one of my longer theory videos, so of course you can always pause and come back to it at any point, but definitely try to watch as much as you can so you get a full picture of all the theories I'm presenting in relation to Kingdom Hearts Dark Road, to the rest of the game installments, and the future directions Square Enix might go with Kingdom Hearts 4 and any other spin-offs. So sit back, relax, and let's dive deep into Kingdom Hearts Dark Road. So I'll start where I left off in terms of Kingdom Hearts Melody of Memories, introducing this new world line called the fictional world, and this world seems to be heavily associated with video games or programs. We've seen in Kingdom Hearts 3 that there is a connection to this Vir Rex video game, or Melody of Memories has revealed that this place is called Quadratum, at least the city is. And we've also seen in Kingdom Hearts Union Cross this Wreck-It Ralph world that also is based off a video game. And then also previously connecting back to Kingdom Hearts 2, in which Kingdom Hearts 2 and Kingdom Hearts Dream Drop Distance, in which we have this mention of a master control program that's associated with the world Tron. Now, thinking back to what the master control program was, it was this program that was found on Anson Wise's computer, in which he actually made a copy of it and used this system as a way to store his research of the heart that he and Xehanort carried out. So this program is filled with data on the research of the heart, and I feel that within this data, Anson the Wise and Xehanort probably started to learn more about the ancient Keyblade War and those connected to it. In a cutscene from Kingdom Hearts Melody of Memories, now we have Jensen mentioning ancient masters that crossed over into another world, and he didn't specifically say which these ancient masters were, so this could be the Apprentices or the Lost Masters, so Avon and crew, or this could be the 5 or the new Union leaders, which is Ephemer and Skuld in them, or it could be implying that it meant all of these people had ended up in this other world. And the other world he is mentioning, it seems, would be this fictional world, the world of Vir Rex or Quadratum. Jensen also mentions that Xehanort looked deeply into this world, so it'll be interesting to learn if Xehanort actually crossed over world lines and interacted with the different characters that seem to be coming into play, such as Zora and his comrades. So I hope in Kingdom Hearts Dark Road that they will greatly expand on Xehanort's journey as he was preparing to become a Keyblade Master, and that it may reveal a bigger connection or direct connection between Kingdom Hearts Union Cross and Kingdom Hearts Dark Road and the future Kingdom Hearts 4. But what we do know is that the Lost Masters were summoned by Lushu at the Keyblade Graveyard at the end of Kingdom Hearts 3. So they probably would have to be summoned from somewhere, because they definitely disappeared from their world at the end of the Keyblade War in the past, before the Dandelions and the new Union leaders ended up inside the Daybreak Town. So Xehanort himself has actually mentioned the Lost Masters, in which he says that the Keyblade wielders wage war over ownership of the light, but what would they do once they made Kingdom Hearts appear was a question he had at one point. And then he also says the Lost Masters started the Keyblade War, or were the ones for whom the Keyblade War started. Now for me, this is something he possibly might have heard either from Master Odin, or he heard from the Master of Masters, because it seems they had multiple conversations. But the second quote, it does make me think that maybe the Lost Masters, since they ended up disappearing at the end of the Keyblade War in the Age of Fairytales, that they were not strong enough to face the darkness, and that the second half of the quote is probably what's occurring, in which they were the ones for whom the war started for. So again, if you know some of my previous theory videos, I had an idea that there's different reiterations of the Keyblade War, right? So that the Master of Masters is traveling throughout time and kind of going in this cycle of trying to get light to prevail over darkness instead of the light expiring and darkness prevailing. So for me, that's what would make sense, that the Keyblade War started for his 6 apprentices, or 6 comrades that fell to the darkness, assuming that they were 7 original lights and 13 original darknesses. Again, this idea I'll expand on more, so if you're a little lost right now, don't worry, I'll come back to it. But again, what we do know is that the Keyblade War started when the Master of Masters was a child, and that there was no masters, or no master Keyblade wielders that existed. Did this conflict start then in his childhood and was carried over to his adulthood? And if he did travel through time and kept going back trying to change events, and leading up into our current situation, but now it seems, of course, that is probably going to carry over into the world of Quadratum, because again, not all the characters that are appearing now in Kingdom Hearts Union Cross and Kingdom Hearts Dark Road are present in Sora's world, and their whereabouts are not known. However, in order to find these individuals, the Keyblade War and Sora's disappearance needed to happen, and this allowed the Lost Masters to return, but this also seems to be prolonging the war. And this war that started all the way back in his childhood was probably because the Master of Masters knew the fate that awaited he and the 6 other individuals. So again, an idea that I had is that maybe they had to sacrifice themselves to the darkness to preserve or make way for new light, because they may have been easily tricked or fell to darkness, and that now that the Lost Masters are actually becoming new darknesses. And of course, we're starting to see this with the new black chess pieces at the end of Kingdom Hearts 3, and we're still waiting to see how many white chess pieces are going to appear. But based on the information I've just presented, in terms of the knowledge that Xehanort may possess, this seems to be heavily connected to probable multiple conversations with the Master of Masters. So there was a cutscene added to Kingdom Hearts 3 Remind in which the Master of Masters and Xehanort do have a discussion about what Xehanort feels his role should be. So how Xehanort met your mom is that before his Mark of Mastery exam, that Xehanort has this conversation with the Master of Masters. And again, based on this conversation, it seems like they've met prior to, because Xehanort, mentions about his black coat that is helping him be protected from the darkness. So there's even a conversation or an encounter before this that they've had. And I feel like during those conversations is when he's really learning about the Lost Masters and the ancient Keyblade War and the Age of Fairytales, and probably even Quadratum at that point. during his travels throughout these different worlds, he's coming to the realization that he feels like his resolve is to bring order to the worlds, to avoid chaos, to expose false light, and that he will in time be able to control the darkness. And of course, this goes all into Master Xehanort's ideals that we see throughout the rest of the Kingdom Hearts installments of bringing this balance of light and dark back, because the world is overrun with light, or a false light as he sees it. So it'll be interesting, of course, to see how this plays, and if they're going to expand more on his ideology and where it's kind of being fueled from, because of course it seems like it's being fueled from conversations with the Master of Masters. But for me, I feel like they're kind of counterparts to each other, because the Master of Masters I am associating with as one of the original lights, or true light, while Xehanort, he seeks to control the darkness, and he's kind of his other half. He's becoming his other half to the Master of Masters in terms of the grand scheme of things. So, of course, as we know, Xehanort was called a scapegoat, a Keyblade wielder that will willingly wield and use darkness. So, of course, this is setting up events for the next big Keyblade War conflict, the next clash between 7 Lights and 13 Darknesses, as we saw at the end of Kingdom Hearts 3. So now, with this introduction to Xehanort, I'm going to segue into Dark Road. The first cutscene that we see in Dark Road is during the introduction chapter, in which we are presented with Xehanort actually dreaming of the player from Kingdom Hearts Union Cross. So of course the main question here is, why is Xehanort dreaming about the player from the Age of Fairytales? And what is his connection to this person? So of course a question that I had is, was Xehanort trying to find out what happened to the player? Kind of what events unfolded between the Kingdom Hearts Union Cross and Dark Road, and who are these other people that this person is with? And maybe this is what led Xehanort to recruit certain people for Organization 13, because as we know, Xemnas, in his form of Xemnas, so as nobody had specifically said he recruited Marluxia, Larxene, LUXord, and Demyx because of their connection to the ancient Keyblade legacy. At this point, we already know that Marluxia and Larxene are connected to Kingdom Hearts Union Cross, and it seems that LUXord is more connected to Quadratum. So now Demyx, is he going to be connected to Kingdom Hearts Union Cross, or is he going to be connected to Quadratum? Of course, for me, I think all 4 of them are connected to both of these places, but where did these said characters originate from? The theory that was already out there that Demyx is probably the player from Kingdom Hearts Union Cross, and I do again like that theory because it kind of lines up his connection between why he chose Demyx for the organization and why he's dreaming about the player. I hope to see some type of parallel between how Sora dreams will use Zora and vice versa, that maybe between the Dark Road, what's coming out in the Dark Road chapters and what's coming out for Kingdom Hearts Union Cross, maybe there will be a cross between Xehanort and the player, in terms of maybe they will meet in a dream, or maybe they will meet in the fictional world, that Xehanort will actually travel there and he'll be able to find these Kingdom Hearts Union Cross characters in the fictional world, or even maybe like Zora and Sora, he'll meet the player in the final world. I'm hoping that Demyx, Marluxia, and Larxene all originated from Kingdom Hearts Union Cross or the Age of Fairytales. Now going into LUXord, I feel like he has an even bigger role. I feel like he may even be a step up above the Master of Masters, if not at the same level. For me, I would love to see that maybe LUXord is actually an original light. So him and the Master of Masters are 2 of the 7 original Guardians of Light. So again, thinking back to the greater concept, it may be possible that when the Keyblade was scattered into 20 different pieces, 7 of light, 13 of dark, but him and 6 other individuals were able to inherit these pieces of light, while 13 individuals inherited 13 pieces of darkness. So in terms of LUXord, if he was like original light, for me it would make a lot of sense, because like his nickname is Gambler Fate, so obviously he's, again, like the Masters trying to change the events and change the sequence of things that are occurring. He has the power to manipulate time, as we saw, fighting him multiple times. He also has his main weapon are cards that are embedded with different powers and different abilities. So I wouldn't be surprised that, if the Masters is making like Cheerthies for Keyblade wielders, and probably showed them or taught them how to materialize Keyblades from their own hearts, that LUXord may be the one that was providing the cards that these Keyblade wielders were using, that allowed them to use powers from the future in the past. So I want to say that probably LUXord and the Masters are definitely working together, or at least are at that same level in which they inherited some powers directly from the Keyblade. I wouldn't be surprised to learn if he's possibly moved between the ancient Keyblade War and the Age of Fairytales time, Sora's time, and into the fictional world, into Verum Rex and Quadratum. Also, if he's primarily connected to the fictional world, maybe even he was the one that kind of made this game-like-esque environment for again, whatever purpose they're trying to accomplish with moving Sora into this world. And then, of course, again, in another theory I've had previously, connecting it back to The World Ends With You. Now, these characters were introduced in Kingdom Hearts Dream Drop Distance, and so the characters in Verum Rex are kind of going through some type of trials and games associated with reclaiming something that was lost, that is also seen in the game The World Ends With You. An important character to that game is called the Game Master, and as I feel like what LUXord's role will be, because he seems like he's the guiding hand to Yozora especially, and probably his comrades as well. So of course I hope Square Enix will confirm and expand on LUXord's origins, be it in the Master's childhood or in Quadratum. But what we do know is that LUXord did give Sora a special card telling him that he could turn the tables. We do know that during one of the loading screens, I think literally right before you go to the final world, there's this quote that says, "The game isn't over until it's over." And who said this quote? It said Light of the Past. Now, LUXord said this exact same quote when during a discussion in the Pirates of the Caribbean world. On the right side of the screen is that someone had constructed all these different quotes in between what LUXord was saying, what Ericus was saying, and some of the quotes that Brain was saying. So for me, they all have a very, very similar mentality, and LUXord is sharing a heart with Brain and Ericus. And so that would be interesting if that kind of comes into play, that maybe these seven original lights kind of passed their hearts onto others, and this is kind of what's kind of choosing individuals in terms of these different reiterations, it seems, of 7 lights throughout different points in time. So kind of going more into that idea, you kind of start with the 7 original lights, be Masters, LUXord, and 5 other people, and then this kind of got passed down through Masters and its apprentices, and this is at the age of Fairytales. But then of course it seemed that they all fell to the darkness, that they weren't strong enough to handle the conflict, that this was then passed on to the main characters of Kingdom Hearts Union Cross. Of course, again, Marluxia, Larxene, Brain, Ephemer, Scald, Ven, and the player. And for them, it seemed their fates, they ended up in Quadratum, in which, again, presented an idea I presented over and over again, is that their hearts had replaced the hearts of the main characters of Quadratum, because all, if not all of them, I think all of them probably used the arc to travel into the future or travel into a new world line, which ended up being Quadratum. But of course, that we know that only the heart can travel through time, or through time and space, but the body doesn't. So they still need a body in whatever destination. And again, I do think there will be more VRX characters that will be revealed, and that can possibly tie back to Larxene and Marluxia. Assuming all of the Kingdom Hearts Union Cross characters traveled over into the fictional world. But we do know a majority of these characters did end up in Sora's time and were recruited into Organization 13. Now in Kingdom Hearts Dark Road, we are introduced to 7 new Keyblade wielders. 2 we already knew, of course, Xehanort and Ericus, but then we have these 4 new characters, Erd, Vor, Hermond, and Baldr, and then there's also even 7 upperclassmen that we still don't know any of their names, but we do know that one is Baldr's sister. And of course, these 7 seem to be the new 7 lights, but as we know, Xehanort will come to try to wield both light and darkness in the future. And of course, we had to throw Bug-Eyed Boy in there as well, Master Yensid. He's probably one of the upperclassmen, so that's why his picture's down there. Last but not least, we have the 7 current lights, which will be Terra, Aqua Ven, Mickey, Sora, Riku, and Kairi. And of course, this all has to start somewhere. And again, circling back, hope to see that we get more information in terms of the original 7 lights, and hopefully that the Master of Masters and LUXord are 2 of these individuals. Now after that little side trip, let's go back to Xehanort in Dark Road. Circling back to the point that Xehanort is actually a seer of darkness, it's interesting that also in this introduction scene that Xehanort is met by, again, this robed figure that has been identified as Xehanort's heart without a body. So for me, that makes me think, oh, okay, it's a heart that's traveling throughout time. It doesn't essentially have a physical form. So maybe Xehanort actually did also use the arc at some point. And maybe when he used the arc is how he was able to travel to Quadratum, assuming that he's been to this world. He may have not been, but I'm hoping he ventured to this world line. Because again, Yensid said he studied this world pretty deeply, so I would assume he would go there. So it begs the question, is the darkness that Xehanort's seeing, is it that same darkness that possessed Ventus? Or is it one of the other 12 that may be hanging around throughout time? And maybe through him seeing this darkness and encountering, and maybe he will even have a conversation with the darkness that, like Brain and Ephemer and Scald of them had. Maybe Xehanort is trying to really understand what their being is, like what the darkness is and what the darkness plans are and what it's doing to their world. And of course, to learn from it so he can learn how to control it. And again, it's fascinating to, be making this connection now, that knowing that Xehanort's heartless Ansem is literally called Ansem, Seeker of Darkness. So it would seem that Xehanort and his heartless and probably his nobody were really seeking this darkness, whether it be just that one darkness or the other darknesses or just darkness in general. But they're definitely seeking it out. It's also interesting that the Ansem Seeker of Darkness had to possess Riku to actually gain a form, but was able to become its own individual. So I wonder if this is kind of the same method that would happen if anybody uses the arc, if their heart is just sent through time or to a different world, that they have to essentially possess another person to become their own being, and that upon separation that they become their own being, and they can kind of I don't know, it's like essentially exist in different places at once, or just that their hearts are just tied to each other at this point now, because they share the body. But what we do know for Master Xehanort is that he eventually did find darkness. He was able to extract it from Ventus, and that what manifested into Vanitas, and this set in motion the events that would lead Sora's heart to be connected to Ventus's heart and all the other people that he's connected through from the age of Fairytales. One other thought I had about the possession of other individuals, maybe it was a strategy for a strong darkness to possess someone with a really strong light, and maybe that was even a tactic Xehanort was trying to test, that could bring about a balance between the light and darkness if these two individuals can share the same heart or share the same body. Because truthfully thinking about it, at some point a lot of the major guardians of light have been possessed or fell to the darkness at some point. We saw it with Terra being possessed by Master Xehanort. We saw it when Aqua was stuck in the Dark Realm and she became Dark Aqua. Again, Riku being possessed by Ansem Secret Darkness. Sora almost becoming one of the 13 darknesses in Kingdom Hearts Dream Drop Distance. Of course, one of the original darknesses possessing Ventus. I can't really think of an event for Kairi, since she was considered a Princess of Heart, so she's a little bit more difficult. I'm trying to think of at some point when she was possessed by darkness. And I guess the same would go for Nikki. But again, this is just an idea presented, but I feel like there may be a connection between a strong light possessing a strong darkness, or a strong darkness possessing a strong light. Moving back to Dark Road cutscenes, we do have this one scene that stood out in which Xehanort and Ericus are communicating with the Queen of Hearts in the Alice in Wonderland world, in which Xehanort says, "So her darkness doesn't come from greed, it comes from wrath." Of course, two words stick out in this quote, greed and wrath, as they are two of the 7 deadly sins. And it's also very apparent that Master of Masters and Apprentices names are derived from the 7 deadly sins. Two other quotes that stuck out was Master Odin when he was talking to his students, in which he was discussing the source of darkness and saying that in ancient times darkness hid within people, but then he also says that people's hearts begin to birth darkness on their own. So it would seem, of course, the darkness that's hiding within people is probably these original darknesses, those original 13 darkness, the darkness that is having a whole conversation with Brain and comrades, versus now it's getting birth from individuals. These individuals are birthing their own darkness. But I feel the ability to birth darkness on their own is originating from the apprentices falling to darkness and becoming these new, I guess you can call them false darknesses or new darknesses, and that their will is so strong in this world that their darkness is spreading through the ages and spreading to different worlds. And of course, this would explain the 7 new black chess pieces on the board that seem to represent the Master of Masters and his apprentices. And I'll be curious to see what other Disney villains that they encounter will kind of align with one of the other 7 deadly sins. If she's wrath and another one may be greed, kind of they may or not kind of go that direction in terms of explicitly stating it. To segue into my next section, it would be very interesting that if one of these students is actually Lucio Breg in disguise, and I fully expect them to display some sort of lust for something. Now, who are these new students? So in Kingdom Hearts Dark Road, we are introduced to the 7 students of Master Odin. And if you know the name Odin, it's associated with the main god of Norse mythology. And it would seem that the characters outside of Xehanort and Ericus also have names of different gods and goddesses. So to start, we have Hermod. That's the tall guy in the back with the dark black hair. Hermod was a messenger god and a war spirit. And for me, I hadn't really associated him with anyone in particular, or like who he reminds me of, but hopefully I'll see more of his personality as they update the story. The next one is Bragi, who's associated with poetry, arts, and music. That's the one with the brown hair, fur-collared coat. And for me, maybe he is connected to Demyx or LUXord, being like the more of the artistic ones. But of course, since his name is Bragi, a lot of people are connecting him to Brag or Lushu. But maybe this is where Demyx comes into play. Maybe he is associated with the new students in Scala at Caelum and not with the Age of Fairytales or Quadratum. Next we have Erd, and she is the girl with the silver hair pulled back, and her name is associated with past and fate. So of course I connected her to Skald, as Erd, Skald, and another Greek goddess are the three fates. One associated with past, one associated with present, one associated with the future. And Skald's name is associated with the future. So maybe another female will make an appearance, maybe an upperclassman. That is the third person that's connected to the present, or maybe even someone in the Verum Rex world. And lastly, we have Vor, which is associated with wisdom, being aware, oath, and knowledge out of darkness specifically, which is very interesting. So maybe she does have a connection to the darkness. And so me and many individuals have the thought that this is Kyrie's grandma, and for me what stuck out in terms of what words were associated with Vor, the word oath is highly connected to Kyrie because she had her keychain that became the Oath Keeper Keyblade for Sora, and that is one of the main important Keyblades that we see in the series, along with Oblivion, and these two were the ones that were wielded by Roxas. And of course, Kyrie's grandma is very knowledgeable about the Age of Fairytales, or the rebirth of the world, that the light came from the hearts of children. So again, that for me, that screams that Warrior is probably Kyrie's grandmother. Now there also is one other student that's not pictured here because he was revealed later, and that is Baldr. Seems to be a very special student, as Master Odin gave him his own task. Now Baldr also is one of the major gods associated with Ragnarok, or the ends of times, in Norse mythology. He is the god of light, and he has a famous death in which he was killed by his blind brother Hord, by instruction of Loki. And somewhere on the internet I kind of found that this may have been knowingly allowed by Odin in order to put Baldr in a safe place until the next cycle of the universe arose after Ragnarok. So for me, it'll be interesting to see what kind of fate awaits Baldr and some of these students, knowing another cutscene that I will discuss next about some of their fates. Now, in terms of going back into Norse mythology, kind of connecting Ericus and Xehanort to Norse gods, is that I connected Ericus to the god Ymir because he is associated with earth, sea, and the heavens. Of course, knowing the reiteration of names between Sorriku and Kyrie, and Ventus Terra and Aqua, that they are associated with earth, sea, and the sky. And for Xehanort, since he can literally see the darkness, it would make sense that he would be associated with the god Hord, who is blind, and of course, when you're blind, you can't see anything but darkness, which would make it very interesting to see what kind of dynamic unfolds between Xehanort and Baldr. And for me, I would really hope to see that the final clash or the final boss fight will be between Xehanort and Baldr, a clash between a great light and a great darkness. Continuing this Norse mythology theme, there's also 7 missing upperclassmen, and I would assume that the names of these upperclassmen are also going to be Norse gods and goddesses. If Jensen is one of the upperclassmen, because it seems like he was a Keyblade wielder around the same time as Ericus and Xehanort, I would associate Jensen with Thor being the protector of humanity, and how Jensen has continually been training Keyblade Masters and trying to protect the different world and world orders through his apprentice Mickey and training Sora and everybody. Next, we do know that Baldr's sister is also one of the upperclassmen, and for me, I would predict that maybe she's Verdandi, and Verdandi is associated with fate or to be or the present. So then that would fill out the 3 fates between Verdandi, Skald, and Erd. Next, if only 2 of the 7, like the underclassmen, are female, then there may be another female. She is probably Freyja or Frigg, and they are associated with love and death, lust and weaving fate. So again, another fate connection, but also connection to. Then we'll also probably have 4 males, in which one I would think, one of the males I think would be Heimdall, in which he's associated with sharp hearing and eyesight. And Heimdall is the guardian of the Bifrost, which is the main bridge to Asgard, or the realm of the gods in Norse mythology. So you see, he would be pretty important. Another male may be Fenrir, if I'm saying that right, and he's associated with peace. So again, he probably has like a very strong personality in terms of like, yes, light is good. Maybe, who knows? But another male may be Tyr, and he's associated with sacrifice. And lastly, we have another male that could be Vidar or Vali, and they're associated with vengeance and wrath. And I believe they were the brothers of Baldr that wanted revenge on Horde for killing Baldr. Again, what we do know about the upperclassmen is that they were sent on a market mastery exam, and their mission was to clean up the world for people to return during world restoration. And it was explained that this world restoration happens at different rate of time, because all the worlds are separate on separate timelines. But currently, there's a bunch of Heartless just roaming free in these worlds that need to be taken care of. If you look on the right, there's, of course, other gods and goddesses and whatnot. I touched on most of them, but one that really stuck out to me was the god Forseti. Even just looking at his image and the way he's standing, and, of course, what he's associated with, justice and reconciliation of light and darkness, I would obviously tie that back to the Master of Masters. And that would seem like maybe that is his goal again, is to have this perfect balance of light and darkness, and for them to come back together. The Keyblade was scattered into 20 pieces, and these pieces need to come back together to allow Kingdom Hearts to return to their world, or the worlds, either the real or the fictional world, and in order to shine its light again, and for the world to be balanced. Of course, last but not least, everyone's favorite god, the little one of trickery and the love from all the Marvel movies. We have Loki, and he's a trickster and shapeshifter, and I would associate that with Lushu, because again, he's traveling throughout time, changing his form, so pretty much body snatching people and putting his heart into different people, changing his form so he can see how events will unfold up into the next Keyblade War. And the final point I want to make with the upperclassmen is that, as you can see, I did bold some of the names, 3 of the names here, and then also Thinking back to Baldr, they may be associated with a cutscene that shows 4 graves. In this cutscene, you can see that Xehanort is at a really big cemetery and he's lying for bouquet of flowers on 4 different graves. And also Ericus comes into the scene and they have a discussion in which it seems that maybe Xehanort was involved in their deaths, or he blames he blames himself for their deaths. It may be that possibly these individuals were possessed by darkness like Ventus was, or they were too weak and they fell to hordes of heartless or darkness or whatever they were facing during their Mark of Mastery exams. And maybe this is the main driving force for Xehanort to bring about order to the world, to avoid any more of their comrades falling to the darkness. Some other thoughts that came to mind is that maybe Xehanort is seeking a way to revive them from the darkness. Maybe they were even lost to the fictional world, or were a sacrifice to use as vessels for people in the fictional world, or people traveling throughout time. And I also wonder that maybe they did something that went against the Book of Prophecies, and again, my idea of the fictional world kind of being purgatory for these individuals that kind of get lost in the darkness of their own heart. And so maybe this is the same fate that happened to these 4 individuals in these graves. But I guess for Xehanort's sake, I would hope that he wouldn't try to bring individuals back from the dead, because again, as we see with Sora, trying to save his friends from their terrible fate, that he ended up in the fictional world. But then again, maybe that's how Xehanort was able to learn about, or if he did explore Quadratum. And maybe Xehanort was sent to the final world and met individuals connected to Quadratum, like Riku and Kairi did with the fairy godmother meeting the nameless star. And that's how they were able to and that's how Riku was able to travel to Quadratum. It would seem changing the fate of people's deaths may be a main driver for individuals ending up in Quadratum. But of course, there's always consequences of the light trying to fight darkness, or the darkness trying to defy light, and that challenging fate or challenging a world's order, be governed by perceived light or darkness, can lead to chaos in the world and also in the individual. Harmony between light and darkness is still not achieved, and of course this can be seen by the chess pieces of light and darkness are not equal, or not being joined, or they're not being joined together. And this is circling back again to the idea of the Masters trying to bring about that balance, trying to rejoin these strong lights and darknesses to finally bring back the Keyblade and bring back Kingdom Hearts, reconnect Kingdom Hearts to their world. Last but certainly not least, we have a cutscene between Baldr and Ericus as they discuss events of the past. And Baldr brings up that first he fears his sister may have been lost to the darkness, and that Ericus's grandfather battled the darkness. Of course, with the recent Kingdom Hearts Union Cross update, we see that Brain wields the same Keyblade as Ericus will when he becomes a master. So this is pretty much confirming that Brain is Ericus's grandfather. Now that it seems ancestry is becoming more important, and that it seems like the events in Scala at Caelum are just a couple generations up from Sora's time, that again it would seem that maybe we can connect these classmates to our future heroes. For me, of course, looking at Baldr with his hair and the color swatch of his outfit, I would connect him to Riku, so maybe he's Riku's grandfather. Of course, as stated earlier, Vor would probably be Kairi's grandmother. One of these individuals be lower or upperclassmen, maybe Sora's. Of course, not knowing what the upperclassmen look like, out of the lower classmen, he would be closest to Bragi. And then I also wonder what kind of relationship Baldr might have to Master Odin, that maybe him and his sister are his children or grandchildren themselves. And of course the mystery behind who Master Odin is, where he originated from. Did he know Brain? Is Master Odin Brain in disguise, or an older version of him? But again, what we do know is that Master Odin sent Baldr out on a special mission, much like the Master sent LUXord out on a special mission. So there may be a strong connection between Master Odin and Baldr. To finish off this video and connecting it back to these 7 lights and 13 darknesses, and now these 4 graves that we see, maybe knowing now that the 6 apprentices, or the original union leaders, were probably possessed by 6 of the original darknesses, there are other darknesses that are unaccounted for. Of course, we know one will come into fruition as Vanitas, which would account for 7 of 13 darknesses, but then there's still 6 other individuals. So for me, it would be interesting to see if maybe we've already seen some of these darknesses come into play, in terms of a darkness that may have been around inside Master Xehanort, in the form that we keep seeing of this robed figure. And also just thinking back to some of the main events in Kingdom Hearts, we do have Ansem that dived into research on the heart, and it became very apparent in the conversation with in the conversation with Brain and Darkness, that they will kind of possess somebody that has a strong desire for something, right? And so Darkness said that Ventus had a strong desire for power, which is why he ended up possessing Ventus and slayed Strelitzia. So maybe something like this happened with Ansem the Wise, and in terms of his obsession with this research of the heart, and that a darkness had possessed him. And we do know that Ansem, he started calling himself Darkness and Zero, so maybe that was a reference to him being possessed by one of the original 13 darknesses. And so with that count, that would leave 4 open spots, and maybe the people that are in the 4 graves are associated with the remaining 4 original darknesses. That's just an idea that I have. But of course, again, you won't see here that the Master of Masters is labeled as original darkness, because I believe that he's original light, along with LUXord and 5 other individuals. In any case, it seems like we're finally getting a timeline in terms of what events are occurring between the Master of Masters' childhood all the way through our current situation with Sora disappearing from his world, or the real world. And now we are in a situation where Master Odin teaches 14 Keyblade wielders. 7 go missing as they prepare for the Mark of Mastery exam, while 6 are sent to find them, and 1 is giving a special mission. And this is where I will stop this theory video for now. I know it was a long one, but we got through it. We did it. We'll see where it goes next. I can't wait to more updates for Kingdom Hearts Union Cross and Dark Road. And if Square Enix, which they probably will, put out another game in between then, before we even get to Kingdom Hearts 4, I'm sure. But thank you for watching this video. Hope you like it. Hope you enjoyed it. Of course, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, share my video on different platforms, and subscribe to my channel. Stay safe and take care. Yes, COVID is still out there.